Oh, so y'all thought I was done with the King of Fighters? Forget about it. Yeah, I'm done with the mainline games, at least until SNK drops King of Fighters 16. But there are still plenty of spin-offs I can take a look at, including, yes, that one. For now, we're going to discuss the two King of Fighters EX games, Neoblood and Howling Blood. These were exclusive entries in the series that were developed for the Nintendo Game Boy Advance, that were co-developed by SNK Playmore and a company called R-Tune. You know, I miss the days when game developers would make games that were exclusively for the handheld market. Nowadays it's either timed Nintendo Switch exclusives or some mobile gacha game. Never mind all that though. The Game Boy Advance was a 32-bit handheld system that was released in the United States in June of 2001. It was a successor to the Game Boy Color and was backward compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color cartridges. Much of the system's lineup consisted of games that were bought over from the Super Nintendo and the arcade. While technically the system was more powerful than the SNES, there are limitations in both the cartridge format and the resolution. Also, for whatever reason, Nintendo decided to only include 2 face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons, whereas the old Super Nintendo controller had 4 face buttons and 2 shoulder pads. Therefore, a lot of those Super Nintendo and arcade games that were bought to the Game Boy Advance had to be rebuilt, taking into the account the limitations of the console's hardware. For instance, Super Street Fighter II Turbo Revival, a Game Boy Advance version of Super Street Fighter II, had all new sprites and backgrounds, along with options that would compensate for the handheld only having 4 action buttons. A version of Contra 3 The Alien Wars removed the 2 top-down levels and replaced them with levels from the Genesis spin-off Contra Hardcore, and players could only carry 1 weapon at a time, whereas the original Super Nintendo version allowed to hold 2 weapons. And don't even get me started on Mortal Kombat Advance. Anyway, Neoblood was developed around the time SNK was going through bankruptcy, and by the time it was finished, the company would re-emerge as Playmore. Still, the development of Neoblood and its sequel Howling Blood would proceed without a hitch, as Marvelous Entertainment would be involved with the distribution of both games. While obviously the games didn't measure up to the Neo Geo in terms of graphics and sound, the EX games didn't actually have to make many concessions when it came to the gameplay. There were 4 action buttons on both the Neo Geo and the Game Boy Advance. Still, there was an option for a 3-button mode in both games, which makes sense, as pressing top buttons are different from pressing face buttons. The games take place in an alternate universe where things deviate after King of Fighters 97. After the Orochi battle, Kyo is found by an all-new character named Mo Habana instead of Ness. This meant that the Ness saga doesn't happen, and instead, the EX games are continuations of the Orochi saga. Iori Yagami has gone missing, and at the same time, an all-new tournament with an all-new sponsor has been announced. So let's start with Neoblood. The graphics are based on King of Fighters 99, complete with static 2D versions of the game's stages. However, the soundtrack features 8-bit style versions of the music in King of Fighters 2000. The gameplay was also based on 99, and this included the counter, armor modes, and the striker system, although the game featured 3-on-3 battles versus the 4-on-4 battles that were in 99. After you pick your 3 team members, you can pick a 4th to be your striker, regardless of what team they're on, or you can choose from several striker-only characters. So with that out the way, let's talk about the team lineups. With the limitations, it stands to reason that the cast of Neoblood is significantly smaller than most entries. Kyo, Benimaru, and the new character Mo Habana make up the hero team. Terry, Andy, and Mai Shiranu make up Team Fatal Fury. Ryo Sakazaki, Robert Garcia, and King make up the Art of Fighting team. Leona, Clark, and Ralph make up the Akari Warriors. Athena, Sai Kensu, and Bao would make up Team Psycho Soldier, while Kim Kapwan, Chang, and Choi made up Team Korea. Sadly, there is no all-women's team in this entry. Shingo, Joe Higashi, Yuri Sakazaki, Whip, Chen Gensai, and Jun Hoon are striker-only characters that can be accessed from the start of the game. Meanwhile, K-Dash, Maxima, Vanessa, and Ryuji Yamazaki are hidden strikers that need to be unlocked. According to the developer, the striker-only characters exist outside the game's canon. Storyline-wise, Joe Higashi's off training, while Yuri is sick with the mumps. because I'm pretty sure you're wondering how K-Dash, Maxima, and Whip can be in the game despite the Nest saga not happening in this universe. Along with the arcade mode, there's also team and single versus modes for 2 players via the link cable, along with survival, practice, and time attack modes for single players. After you make it through the game's lineup, you take on Iori Yagami as a mid-boss. Once you defeat him, it's time to take on the game's final boss, none other than Geese Howard. I suppose if you're not going to have Rugal in the game, Geese Howard will be a great second place boss. It seems that Geese tried to brainwash Iori so he can take control of the Orochi power. Once you defeat him, his Southtown Tower will crumble to the ground, while the heroes will make their escape. The crazy part is that you have to beat both Iori and Geese 3 times before you win the match. Neoblood received generally positive ratings, with most scores hanging around the 80s. The game was praised for having smooth gameplay, and it was said to be one of the better fighting games for the Game Boy Advance, with Neoblood being compared to games such as Mortal Kombat Advance, Tekken, and Guilty Gear. Although there was some criticism labeled toward the graphics and the sound, compared to how they translated from the Neo Geo to the Game Boy Advance. Still, it was understood that the game was basically trying to take a Neo Geo game and fit it onto a Game Boy Advance cartridge, so obviously things were going to take some hits. As for me though, I thought the game was pretty good. It was lacking when it came to sound and visuals, but still, this was the first King of Fighters game on the Game Boy Advance, so I give the developers an A for effort, especially considering the company was going through bankruptcy at the time. EX2 Howling Blood will be released in North America and Japan in 2003, with a European release following in 2006 from Acclaim. Yes, that Acclaim. The game's plot would add more insight into the alternate timeline. We will learn that in the EX universe, there aren't 3 sacred treasures, but 10. A mysterious man named Gustav would host the newest King of Fighters tournament. However, his true aim was to resurrect King of Fighters 96 boss Gonitz by having his spirit possess a young boy named Shinobu. The game would see a huge improvement over Neoblood, and Neoblood wasn't that bad a game at all. The sprites were slightly bigger, the background colors were more vibrant, the gameplay was faster and more fluid, the user interface and heads-up display elements were improved, and the game brought back the mid-arcade story sequences. The striker system would see a slight overhaul. Instead of picking a 4th character, your striker is basically the next teammate in line. If you're only your last remaining fighter, then there are no strikers available. The game's system and backgrounds were pulled from King of Fighters 2000. The music would also be improved over the last game, and again the soundtrack would feature remix versions of King of Fighters 2000 tracks. This time they'd sound like they'd be at home on the SNES rather than the Famicom. Unfortunately, the survival and time attack modes from Neoblood were removed, so the only single player modes available were story mode and practice. There would be one new team added to the team lineups. Still, the cast was pretty small compared to other King of Fighters games. Team Fatal Fury, the Akari Warriors, Team Psycho Soldier, and Team Korea remained the same. However, the Art of Fighting team would see Yuri and Takuma take over for King and Robert, while the Hero team would have Benimaru on the sidelines in favor of an all-new character, Reiji Ugami. Reiji is a member of the Yada clan, the same clan that Chizuru is a part of. As a matter of fact, his young daughter, which can be seen in game art, wears an outfit similar to her. So on a side note, it's been speculated that Chizuru is married to Reiji, and that Reiji's daughter is in fact her daughter. This isn't the case. They're just acquaintances, and they're close enough that the young girl is inspired by Chizuru. After being the sub-boss in the previous game, Iori would join the game's cast with a team of its own. But it wasn't Vice and Mature who would be joining him. It would be 2 all-new characters, Jun Kagami, a tall, elegant, and sexy-looking woman who battles with grappling attacks, and Miyu Kurosaki, a young girl who attacks with feathers. Both these women, along with Reiji, are 3 of the 10 sacred treasures. As a matter of fact, Miyu is the older sister of Shinobu, and she joins with Jun and Iori, hoping that they can help her rescue him. Once you make it to the end, you face the possessed Shinobu himself. His first form is hard enough, as he has a huge wind attack that can stop you in your tracks once you get too close. Once you defeat him, he transforms into a golden light form with orbs flying around him. While he is difficult to battle, he's easy to take down once you figure out the pattern, and ultimately it feels a bit anticlimactic as far as King of Fighters bosses go. Like with Neoblood, Howling Blood would also gain a positive reception among fans and critics. It ranks as generally favorable on Metacritic with a user score of 7.6 and a critic score of 80. Critics will once again praise the smooth gameplay, along with the improvements that were made to the graphics and music. Criticism was generally aimed at the lack of innovation, as the game was mostly seen as a Game Boy Advance port of King of Fighters 2000. As for me, once again, I enjoyed playing the game, and I was pleased at the improvements that had made over Neoblood. If you wanted to take King of Fighters on the go, this is the best way to do it, outside of copying a Steam Deck or an ROG Ally or whatever, and loading it up with Neo Geo game. Still, I'm disappointed at the new characters who debuted in the series, like Mo Habana and Reiji, have yet to be seen again in the series. I mean, can we at least get these guys in a dream match or something? Who am I kidding? I'm still hoping that the SNK stops doing Team USA dirty, so why would I expect better for these guys? So if you want to buy these games, Neoblood will usually run you around $25 and more depending on packaging and condition, with some copies ranging in the low hundreds, the average price being around $60. As for Howling Blood, it's slightly more expensive, with prices on the lower end setting you back around $70 or $80. On the higher end, you could be looking at least $150 with an average of $118. Of course, you always have the option of channeling your inner Saida El Hura. Of course, there's also hope that maybe Nintendo will put the games on their Switch Online service. The King of Fighters Neo Wave is another spin-off for the franchise. Released in 2004 for Japanese arcades, it would eventually come to PlayStation 2 and Xbox, although only the Xbox version would see a US release. The game was meant to be a tech demo for Sammy's Adams Wave arcade board. SNK had signed a deal with the company to use its arcade hardware for several upcoming games. King of Fighters Neo Wave was meant to showcase what a future King of Fighters game would look like using the hardware. Eventually, this would set the stage for King of Fighters 11. Neo Wave was a non-canon dream match game with a lineup similar to King of Fighters 2002. Like Neoblood, Geese Howard is the game's final boss, although strangely, it's his younger version from Art of Fighting 2. To say the least, it's a strange and interesting footnote in King of Fighters history. If you want to learn more about the game, my video about it just popped up on your screen. Check it out. Until next time, I'm Audi 51000G, kinfolk.